Welcome back in. Welcome back in. We are on to week 17, which means we are finally made it to the fantasy championships. And for all you sickos out there that play week 18, I want you to just let me know in the comment section below why you play week 18. And if your answer is because the NFL plays 18 weeks, let's find something different here, okay? Because there's a different approach here. We should not be playing week 18. That's my public service announcement for the week. Let's get into what we came here for. Let's start with our RB1s for week 17. And they are as follows: Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Dalvin Cook, Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, James Conner, Derrick Henry, Travis Etienne, Nick Chubb, Ramondre Stevenson, Joe Mixon, and Aaron Jones, wrapping up our top 12 running backs for this week. So let's go ahead and get into some of our RB1s that we want to highlight this week. First up, let's talk about James Conner. They're going against the Atlanta Falcons this week. And James Conner has really quietly been really solid over the last month and a half of the season. He has been an RB1 in 5 of his last 6 games. He's on the season now. He is RB16. However, he has been the RB5 since week 10. And over that span, he is 10th in attempts per game, 12th in rushing yards, 7th in targets, 15th in receiving yards, first in touchdowns with 7, 6 rushing and 1 receiving, and he's 22nd in yards after contact per attempt. This week, they get a really good matchup against the Atlanta Falcons, who are 23rd in rush DVOA. They'll have the 8th most rushing yards, the 15th most touchdowns, the 11th most fantasy points to running back. So this is a very good matchup for James Conner, who has basically played 90+% of the snaps every single week since week 10 as well. So he's just in a really great spot this week. So James Conner is a really, really solid play for fantasy managers that have, ridden the storm with him, because early in the year it wasn't great. But like I said, since week 10, he has been fantastic. Let's keep it moving here. Let's talk about Travis Etienne. He's kind of bounced back over the last 2 weeks, finishing RB22 and RB15 over that span. He's averaging 23 touches per game, averaging 93 total yards, but hasn't scored a touchdown since week 9. So that has hurt his upside a little bit. But this is a good matchup against Houston. I know typically we talk about Houston and them being terrible against Storm, but they've gotten a little bit better as of recent weeks. But on the season, their numbers are going to look a little bit different. They're 24th in rush DVOA. They'll have the most rushing yards and touchdowns and the 4th most schedule adjusted PPR points per game. But over the last 4 games, they are 16th in rush DVOA. So they have started to show a little bit of signs of life. They did just allow 120 plus yards and 2 touchdowns to Derrick Henry last week. So this is a good matchup here for Travis Etienne, despite Houston playing a little bit better against the run. So those are the 2 running backs that I really like this week. Kind of a bounce back spot here for Travis Etienne, and then James Conner is also at a good spot. So let's move over to our RB2s, and those are Alvin Kamara, Tony Pollard, Najee Harris, Miles Sanders, Jerick McKinnon, Cam Akers, Kenneth Walker, Tyler Algier, Leonard Fournette, Ezekiel Elliott, Brian Robinson, and J.K. Dobbins. So let's jump into some of these RB2s. First, I just want to touch on Alvin Kamara and Tony Pollard. They are both in average to below average spots this week. The Eagles have turned things around. They are top 3 in rush DVOA over the last 4 weeks. Now you have the Titans with Tony Pollard. They've actually been one of the best run defenses in the league, but they have shown some signs of cracks over the last 4 games. They have slipped to 15th in rush DVOA over that same time span. Tony Pollard has also missed practice on Monday, but I do expect him to be ready to go and good to go for this game. So there's no real big concerns here. But we'll have to monitor at least Tony Pollard just to make sure that he's able to play on Thursday. Let's keep it moving here, and let's talk about Jerick McKinnon, Isaiah Pacheco. Kind of the same story here we've been talking about recently. Matchup here against Denver. Last week, Jerick McKinnon saw a different production versus the Seahawks. He only had 8 total touches in that game and 38 yards, but he did haul in another touchdown for 13 PPR points, while Isaiah Pacheco did most of the heavy lifting with 14 carries, 2 targets, but only 10 PPR points. He has become basically touchdown dependent due to the lack of receiving work and the lack of touchdown production. Basically, once they get inside the 20, it's Jerick McKinnon time. And then once they get down to the goal line, you typically see them throw the ball more. So it has hurt Isaiah Pacheco, which has limited his ceiling. He's much more just kind of an RB3 at this point. But Denver is 22nd in rush DVOA. They'll have the 12th most rushing yards, the 19th most touchdowns, the 12th most receptions, and the 11th most receiving yards. So this spells a good matchup here for Jerick McKinnon, who torched this defense a few weeks ago. They also allowed the 8th most schedule adjusted PPR points to running back. So really good matchup for Jerick McKinnon. Okay matchup for Isaiah Pacheco, mainly because, like I said, he's just not utilized in the passing game, and it becomes really touchdown dependent if he's going to have a good week or not. So let's keep moving here. Let's talk about somebody that I did not expect to talk about at all this year, especially how the early part of the season goes, and that is Cam Akers. Cam Akers has been great over the last 4 games of the season, and this was a guy that was possibly looking to get traded, was going to get released at one point in the season, and then because it's the NFL, didn't happen. They end up releasing Darrell Henderson instead. But Cam Akers this year has not been good. But over the last 4 games, that has been a completely different story. Experiencing a late season resurgence, coming off his best game of the year with 147 total yards and 3 touchdowns against the Broncos. And over his last 4 games, he is the RB3 overall, sixth in rushing yards, eighth in carries. Now, he's not utilized much in the passing game, 32nd in targets and 21st in receiving yards, but he does have the most rushing touchdowns with 6 over that span as well. The Chargers are 28th in rush DVOA. They'll have the second most rushing yards, the seventh most touchdowns, and the fifth most fantasy points to running backs. Now, this is another team that's gotten a little bit better against the run in recent weeks. They are 17th in rush DVOA over the last 4, so they are a little bit better, but this still should be a good matchup for Cam Akers. This Rams team has done a pretty good job of kind of turning things around here as of late with Baker Mayfield at quarterback. Like, I don't know, it's the NFL, but Cam Akers is in a good spot this week. Next up, let's talk about Tyler Algier. They get a matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. We already talked about the other side of this with James Conner. The last 2 weeks, he's really started to see a big boost in production, and that has Caleb Huntley also going to IR. He is averaging 17 carries, 128 total yards, 2.5 receptions, and 1 touchdown. And he's averaging 19.5 PPR points per game. He has finishes of RB8 and RB12 over that span. He is on the season 17th in rushing yards on the year, almost 1,000 rushing yards on the year. He could possibly hit that mark over the last 2 games of the season, but he's done that with only being 27th in carries. So he's been really productive. He's also 6th in yards after contact per attempt. So Tyler Algier has been very good, especially as of recently. Arizona versus running backs has been really bad. They are 25th in rush DVOA. They'll have the 17th most rushing yards, but the 5th most receptions and receiving yards, and the 9th most touchdowns on the year. And they allow the most schedule adjusted PPR points to running backs on the season. So Tyler Algier is in a very good spot this week against the Arizona Cardinals. So I really do like Tyler Algier this week. Next up, let's talk about Leonard Fournette. They play the Carolina Panthers. Now, this isn't the best matchup for him, but his involvement in the passing game has just been elite and is what's kept him afloat this year. Last week versus Arizona, 20 carries, 72 yards, but 9 receptions on 10 targets for 90 yards. No scores, but he did score 25 PPR points. He has now seen 7 or more targets in 3 of his last 4 games. And on the season, he's averaging 62% of the opportunities, 12% target share, 641 rushing yards, which is terrible for the amount of touches that he sees. But he does have 410 receiving yards, which is top 5 among all running backs. He's averaging 15.5 PPR points, and he's 28th in yards created per touch. Now, this week against Carolina, they are 15th in rush DVOA. They allow the 14th most rushing yards, the 13th most touchdowns, and the 12th most fantasy points to running backs. However, they have been better against the run as of late. They are 3rd in rush DVOA over their last 4 games, so I did want to mention that. But still a pretty good spot here for Leonard Fournette. Likely to see some usage in the passing game. And this is a must-win game for them because if the Bucs lose this, they are in jeopardy of missing the playoffs. And Carolina could actually backdoor them and get into the playoffs. That NFC South is so bad, just so bad. But anyways, this is a matchup for Carolina and Tampa Bay for the division, so it's like a mini playoff game here for them. Let's keep it moving here and let's wrap this up here with a few more guys we want to hit on. Brian Robinson, they play Cleveland this week. He hasn't been very efficient at all this year, but he's still seeing 15 carries per game, 65 rushing yards per game. He does have 3 touchdowns on the season, but he's only averaging just about 10 fantasy points per game. Cleveland, terrible against running backs, 30th in rush DVOA, 7th most rushing yards, 3rd most touchdowns, and the 5th most fantasy points to running back. So it is a good spot for Brian Robinson. As long as they can keep this game close or have a lead, Brian Robinson should be in a good spot. Let's hit on a couple RB3s and then we'll get out of here. AJ Dillon is also having himself a little resurgence here. He has 4 straight top 20 performances, 14.75 carries per game, 57 rushing yards, 3 targets for 24.25 receiving yards, and 1.25 touchdowns per game. And he's averaging 18.5 fantasy points per game over that span. He is touchdown dependent. A lot of his numbers don't look vastly different from what he did earlier in the year. It's just he only scored 1 touchdown from those weeks prior to the last 4. And so that's really been where his production has come. Minnesota versus running backs, 17th in rush DVOA, but they've allowed the 10th most schedule adjusted PPR points per game to the position. So A.J. Dillon versus Minnesota at home in Lambeau. I think this is a good spot for A.J. Dillon once again. He almost cracked my top 24. I have him at RB25, just outside of it. I could put him inside there ahead of J.K. Dobbins, but just kind of splitting hairs a little bit here for A.J. Dillon. And then James Cook versus Cincinnati this week. Double-digit fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. This is a tougher matchup since he ranks 13th in rush DVOA. They'll have the 6th fewest rushing yards, 11th fewest rushing touchdowns, and the 12th fewest schedule-adjusted PPR points on the season. So this is a great matchup, but in what should be a high-scoring affair, Monday Night Football, this is a big game for both of these teams. Cincinnati does still have a shot at the number 1 seed. And then if Buffalo loses this and Kansas City wins, then Kansas City would take over the 1 seed here for the playoffs. So this does have a lot of implications on both sides here for both of these teams. So James Cook, I think, could be involved in the passing game. He's a much better pass catching running back than Devin Singletary, and he just looked like a better running back than Devin Singletary as of late. So we'll see here, but I do think he makes for a decent RB3 option in what should be a shootout game. And the other one's Zonovan Knight. Now, listen, I get it. I know what you're going to say. Hell no. No thanks, because he has been really bad over his last 2 games, back to back, scoring 2 fantasy points over his. However, prior to that, with Mike White at quarterback, he was RB 13, 11, and 24 over that span. Mike White is expected to return this week, and which is good news because we know he likes to dump it off to running backs. And let's be honest, he's a better quarterback right now at this point than Zach Wilson is. So this is a big upgrade for them. And this is a good matchup against Seattle. They rank fourth in rush. Seattle ranks fourth in rushing yards allowed, fifth in rushing touchdowns. They've had the seventh most receptions, the third most receiving yards, and the third most schedule adjusted PPR points to running back. So Zonovan Knight is in a very good spot this week, but I get it if you don't want to play him just because of how bad he's been the last 2 games. But I do think this is a big upgrade in terms of matchup this week against Seattle versus what they've played the last prior 2 weeks. And then, like I said, with Mike White as well, should help him as well. So, and this wraps up our top running backs for the week. I appreciate everybody checking out the video. I hope everybody had a good season this year. Hope everybody wins that fantasy championship heading into the new year. Keep it locked in here. We have a ton of content coming. We're not done yet. If you're in a DFS, you can jump over there. We'll have content all the way through the fantasy playoffs. But we are going to be dropping our early 2023 rankings, just kind of an early look at what next season could look like here over the next week or two. So you can be looking forward to that. So appreciate everybody checking it out. Appreciate everybody rocking with us. Appreciate all the support this year. Couldn't do this without you guys. Be sure to leave a comment in the comment section below of any questions you may have. Let's win a chip. That's what we played all year for. Bye.